The first thing Elena Vance ever loved was the night sky. Not the cold, distant thing most people glanced at and forgot, but the living, breathing tapestry that wrapped around the world like a velvet blanket stitched with diamonds. She was 7 years old when her grandmother took her to the old observatory on the hill, the one with the brass telescope that smelled like oil and time. Elena pressed her eye to the lens and saw Saturn's rings for the first time, a perfect, floating halo of ice and rock, and she cried, not because she was sad, but because the universe was so impossibly beautiful, it hurt. Her grandmother, a woman with soft hips and a softer laugh, had knelt beside her and whispered, "The stars don't care if you're small, Elena. They shine for everyone who bothers to look up." That moment planted a seed in her chest, one that grew into a lifelong devotion to the cosmos. She memorized constellations before she memorized multiplication tables. She could name the moons of Jupiter by the time she was 10, while other girls her age dreamed of princes and castles. Elena dreamed of nebulae and black holes, of the silent, eternal dance of galaxies. She was a round child, then a curvy teenager, then a plus-size woman, and the world had a way of telling her, in 1,000 tiny cuts, that her body was wrong. Too much, too soft, too present. But under the stars, none of that mattered. The universe didn't measure her waistline, it only asked for her wonder. So she built her life around that wonder. She got a degree in astronomy, worked odd jobs to pay for it, and eventually landed a position as a guide at the Celestial Dome Planetarium, a modest but beloved institution on the outskirts of the city. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, and the projector was older than she was, but Elena loved every inch of that place. She loved the smell of the old velvet seats, the hum of the machinery, the way the dome above her could transform into a perfect replica of the night sky. She loved the children who gasped when she pointed out Orion's belt, the teenagers who pretended to be bored but secretly leaned forward, the elderly couples who held hands in the dark. She was good at her job, really good. She didn't just recite facts, she told stories. She made the stars feel close, personal, alive. And for a while, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. But everything has a way of shifting when you least expect it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the summer solstice. Elena was in the planetarium's tiny office, a closet really, tucked behind the main dome, surrounded by star charts and half-empty coffee mugs. Her boss, a perpetually frazzled man named Gerald, poked his head in with an expression that hovered somewhere between terror and excitement. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking, "we've got a private booking. A big one. Like really big." She looked up from her notes, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "How big?" "The Ashford Foundation," Gerald said, and the name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "They want the whole dome for a private event. Family gala, black tie, the works." Elena's stomach tightened. Everyone in the city knew the Ashford name. It was stitched into the fabric of the place, whispered in back rooms and printed on the sides of buildings. Old money, people said, but the kind of old money that came with shadows. Julian Ashford was the head of the family now, a man in his late 30s, with a reputation that could freeze a room. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jawline that looked like it had been carved by someone who didn't believe in softness. The tabloids called him a businessman. The police called him a person of interest. Everyone else just called him the Mafia boss, though never to his face. His family's foundation was a legitimate front, funding arts and education, and, apparently, private planetarium shows. "They want the full experience," Gerald continued, wringing his hands. "A guided tour of the night sky, constellation myths, the works, and they specifically requested you." Elena blinked. "Me? Why?" Because you're the best we've got, Gerald said, and there was a flicker of genuine pride in his voice. Your reputation precedes you, apparently. Someone on their board saw one of your public shows last month and raved about it, said you made the stars feel like poetry. Elena should have felt flattered. Instead, she felt a cold prickle of unease. The Ashfords weren't the kind of people who appreciated poetry. They were the kind of people who used words like weapons and smiles like shields. But she needed the money. The Planetarium was always one broken projector away from bankruptcy, and she wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. Okay, she said, forcing a smile. When is it? Saturday night. 3 days from now. 3 days. Elena spent every spare moment preparing. She polished her presentation until it gleamed, weaving together ancient Greek myths, modern astronomy, and the kind of quiet wonder that made her shows special. She double-checked the projector, a finicky old beast that required constant coaxing. She laid out her best outfit, a deep blue dress that hugged her curves without apology, paired with a silver necklace shaped like a crescent moon. She wanted to look professional, but she also wanted to look like herself. The world had spent years telling her to shrink, to hide, to apologize for the space she occupied. She was done with that. On the night of the event, the Planetarium transformed. The parking lot filled with sleek black cars that gleamed under the streetlights. Men in tailored suits and women in shimmering gowns drifted toward the entrance, their laughter sharp and polished as cut glass. Elena watched from the side door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt like a sparrow who'd accidentally wandered into a gathering of peacocks, but she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked inside. The main lobby was a swirl of champagne and perfume. Crystal glasses clinked. Jewels sparkled. Elena moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible until she wasn't. A woman in a red dress, all sharp angles and sharper eyes, turned as Elena passed and let her gaze slide down Elena's body with deliberate slowness. "Oh," the woman said, her voice dripping with honeyed condescension. "You must be the guide. How charming." The word charming landed like a slap. Elena felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her expression neutral. "I am," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be leading the presentation tonight. I hope you enjoy it." The woman's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure we will. It's so important to support local talent." She turned away before Elena could respond, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and quiet humiliation. Elena stood there for a moment, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd dealt with this kind of thing before, the dismissive glances, the whispered comments, the assumption that a woman her size couldn't possibly be competent or interesting. It always stung, but she'd learned to let it roll off her back. Tonight, though, the sting felt sharper. Maybe it was the opulence of the setting, the way everyone seemed to belong to a world she could never enter. Maybe it was the weight of the Ashford name, pressing down on her like a physical force. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. The stars didn't care about waistlines or bank accounts. They only cared about the truth. And she was going to show these people the truth, whether they wanted to see it or not. The dome itself was a cathedral of darkness. Rows of plush seats curved around the central projector, a hulking machine that looked like something out of a retro-futuristic dream. The ceiling soared overhead, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with light. Elena stood at the control panel, her fingers resting on the familiar buttons and dials. The audience filed in, their chatter fading to murmurs as they settled into their seats. She spotted Julian Ashford near the front, surrounded by a cluster of associates. He was even more imposing in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an intensity that seemed to suck the air out of the room. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over her once, briefly, before moving on. Beside him sat a man Elena recognized from the news, Vincent Hale, the family's longtime advisor. He was older, silver-haired, with a smooth smile that never quite reached his eyes. There was something about him that made Elena's skin prickle, a sense of coiled danger beneath the polished surface. She pushed the feeling aside and began her presentation. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life, and the dome above them exploded into stars. Elena's voice, soft and melodic, filled the darkness. She started with the basics: the North Star, the Big Dipper, the myths of ancient Greece. But she didn't just recite facts. She told stories. She spoke of Cassiopeia, the vain queen who boasted of her beauty and was punished by the gods, chained to her throne in the sky. She described Orion, the great hunter, and his eternal chase across the heavens. She painted pictures with her words, weaving science and legend together until the stars felt like old friends. For a while, the audience was quiet, but then the whispers started. At first, they were just rustles of sound, too low to make out. Then they grew louder, sharper, like needles pricking at the edges of her concentration. "She's so enthusiastic," someone murmured, the word dripping with mockery. Like a child, showing off her toys. A ripple of laughter followed. Elena's voice faltered for just a moment, but she caught herself and kept going. She was used to this. She'd been mocked before. She could handle it. But then, another voice cut through the darkness, louder and crueler. "Honestly, it's a bit sad. A woman her age, playing with stars like a little girl. And in that dress. Does she think anyone wants to see that?" The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her hands froze on the control panel. Her throat tightened. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the sting of tears threatening to break through. She'd spent years building walls against this kind of cruelty. But tonight, in this dark dome surrounded by strangers who saw her as nothing more than a joke, the walls felt paper-thin. She forced herself to breathe. She forced herself to continue. She was a professional. She would finish this presentation, collect her paycheck, and go home. That was all she had to do. But then something changed. She was in the middle of transitioning to the summer constellations, her fingers moving automatically over the controls, when her eyes caught something on the projection. A flicker, a discrepancy. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. But Elena had spent years staring at star charts. She knew the night sky like she knew her own heartbeat, and the sky above her right now was wrong. The constellation of Cygnus, the Swan, was slightly off. Its brightest star, Deneb, was shifted a fraction of a degree from where it should be. And there, nestled among the familiar points of light, was a pattern she didn't recognize. A cluster of faint stars that shouldn't exist. Her heart began to race. She zoomed in, her fingers trembling on the controls. The pattern resolved into something more distinct. A series of coordinates hidden in the arrangement of the stars, latitude and longitude, and beneath them, a date, tomorrow's date. Elena's mind reeled. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't an error. Someone had deliberately altered the projection file, embedding a coded message in the star map, and the coordinates pointed to a location she recognized from the news: the Ashford family's private estate, a sprawling compound outside the city. She glanced at the audience. Julian Ashford was watching her now, his dark eyes narrowed. There was something in his expression, curiosity maybe, or suspicion. Beside him, Vincent Hale was whispering something in his ear, his smooth smile firmly in place. Elena's instincts screamed at her. Something was very, very wrong. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what this meant. But she couldn't do it alone. She finished the presentation on autopilot, her mind churning. When the lights came up and the audience began to disperse, She slipped away to the back office. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out her phone and called the one person she knew could help. Leo was a teenager, barely 17, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a mind like a steel trap. He'd been coming to the planetarium for years, first as a wide-eyed kid and now as a volunteer. He was quiet, observant, and fiercely intelligent, and he knew the projection system almost as well as Elena did. She found him in the storage room, tinkering with an old telescope. "Leo," she said, her voice urgent, "I need your help." He looked up, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" "The star map for tonight's show. It was altered. Someone embedded a coded message in the projection." Leo's eyes widened. "What kind of message?" "Coordinates. A date. I think it's a warning." She pulled up the original projection file on her tablet and showed him the discrepancies. Leo studied the screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he compared the two versions. "You're right," he said after a moment, his voice hushed. "This isn't a random error. Someone deliberately overlaid this pattern. And look here." He pointed to a faint string of numbers hidden in the corner of the file. "That's a timestamp. The file was modified 3 days ago, at 2:47 a.m. 3 days ago, right around the time the Ashford Foundation booked the event." Elena's blood ran cold. "Can you trace who did it?" Leo shook his head. "Not from here, but I can pull up the access logs. Give me a few minutes." While Leo worked, Elena paced the small room, her mind spinning. The coordinates pointed to the Ashford estate. The date was tomorrow, and the message was hidden in a star map shown to Julian Ashford himself. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Someone wanted Julian to see this. Someone who knew he'd be here tonight. The door to the office creaked open, and Elena spun around. Julian Ashford stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space like a storm cloud. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The sharp lines of his face, the cold intelligence in his eyes, the way he seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'd like a word." Elena's heart lurched. "Mr. Ashford, I was just—" "You noticed something during the presentation," he said, cutting her off. "I saw your face. You found something in the stars. There was no point in lying." He was the kind of man who could smell deception from a mile away. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The projection file was altered. Someone embedded a set of coordinates and a date. The coordinates point to your family's estate. The date is tomorrow." Julian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of something dark and dangerous. "Show me." Elena led him to the tablet and pulled up the altered star map. She pointed out the discrepancies, the hidden pattern, the faint numbers. Julian studied the screen in silence, his jaw tightening. "These coordinates," he said slowly, "they're for the east wing of the estate. There's a meeting scheduled there tomorrow, a very important meeting." "It could be a trap," Elena said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Someone wanted you to see this. Someone who knew you'd be here tonight." Julian turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. It was grief. Raw, unguarded grief. "My brother," he said quietly. "Marcus. He's been missing for 6 months. Everyone thinks he's dead, but he was the only one who knew the old codes, the ones we used as children. He used to hide messages in star charts when we were kids. It was our game." Elena's breath caught. "You think he sent this?" "I don't know what to think." Julian's voice was tight. "But if Marcus is alive, and if he's trying to warn me—" He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. Leo spoke up from the corner, his voice tentative. "I found something in the access logs. The file was modified by someone using a remote login. The IP address traces back to a location near the old docks. It's not much, but it's a start." Julian nodded slowly. The docks. That's where Marcus was last seen. He turned back to Elena, and there was something new in his gaze. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. You saw something no one else would have caught. You might have just saved my life. Elena didn't know what to say. She'd spent the whole night feeling small and insignificant, mocked by people who saw her as nothing more than a joke. And now here was Julian Ashford, the most dangerous man in the city, looking at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. "I need to go public with this," she said, the words surprising her. "The people in that audience, they need to know what's happening. If there's a trap, if someone in your own circle is betraying you, they need to see it." Julian's eyes narrowed. "That could be dangerous." "I know," Elena said, "but I've spent my whole life being invisible, being dismissed. Tonight those people laughed at me. They called me childish. They mocked my body and my passion. And I let them. But I'm not going to let them walk away without knowing the truth. The stars don't lie, Mr. Ashford. And neither do I." For a long moment, Julian just stared at her. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Call me Julian," he said, "and do what you need to do." The dome was still dark when Elena stepped back inside. Most of the guests had moved to the lobby for drinks and conversation, but a few lingered in their seats, their voices low. Elena walked to the control panel, her heart pounding. Leo was beside her, tablet in hand, ready to project the evidence. Julian stood near the entrance, his presence a silent warning to anyone who might try to stop her. Elena's fingers found the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The chatter died down. Heads turned. The woman in the red dress, the one who had mocked her earlier, looked up with a smirk. "I have something to show you," Elena continued. "Something important." She pressed a button, and the dome above them flickered to life. The altered star map appeared, the hidden coordinates glowing faintly among the familiar constellations. Elena explained what she had found, the discrepancies, the coded message, the date and location. She explained how the file had been modified, how the IP address traced back to the docks, how Julian's missing brother might be trying to send a warning. The room was silent. The smirk on the woman's face had vanished, replaced by something that looked like fear. "This message," Elena said, her voice ringing through the darkness, "was meant for Julian Ashford. It's a warning that tomorrow's meeting at the Ashford estate is a trap. Someone in this room, someone close to the family, may be involved." Gasps rippled through the audience. People turned to look at each other, suspicion flickering in their eyes. And then Vincent Hale stood up. The family advisor's smooth smile was gone. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "This is absurd," he said, his voice shaking. "A ridiculous fantasy, from a woman who clearly wants attention." But Julian was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hand closing around Vincent's arm like a vice. "Vincent," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "you were the one who suggested this event. You were the one who insisted on the Planetarium, and you've been acting strangely for weeks." Vincent's composure cracked. "Julian, please. I can explain. Save it." Julian's eyes were cold as ice. "We'll talk at the estate, but not at the meeting. The meeting is cancelled, and you're coming with me." He gestured to 2 of his men, who stepped forward and took Vincent by the arms. The advisor didn't resist. He just slumped, defeated, as they led him away. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, asking questions, demanding explanations. But Elena barely heard them. She was staring at the star map above her, at the hidden message that had changed everything. Julian approached her, his expression unreadable. "You did well," he said quietly. "More than well. You were brave." Elena swallowed hard. "I just did what felt right. That's more than most people ever do." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "My brother, if he's alive, if this message is real, you've given me hope, and you've given me a chance to stop whatever's coming. I won't forget that." Elena didn't know what to say. She'd spent her whole life feeling like she didn't matter, like her passions were silly, like her body was something to be ashamed of. But tonight, under the stars she loved, she had stood up and spoken the truth, and it had mattered. The days that followed were a blur. The meeting at the Ashford estate was cancelled, and an investigation revealed that Vincent Hale had been working with a rival family to orchestrate a coup. The trap was real. Armed men had been waiting at the estate, ready to ambush Julian and his closest allies. But thanks to Elena's discovery, the ambush was thwarted. Vincent was arrested, the rival family was exposed, and Julian's brother, Marcus, was found alive, hiding in a safe house near the docks. He had been the one to send the message, using the old codes from their childhood. He had risked everything to warn his brother, and Elena had been the one to hear him. The story made headlines. The Curvy Planetarium guide who had saved the Mafia boss. The woman who had been mocked and dismissed, only to uncover a conspiracy hidden in the stars. Elena's phone rang off the hook with interview requests, but she turned most of them down. She wasn't interested in fame. She just wanted to go back to her quiet life, her star charts, her dome of darkness and light. But Julian Ashford had other plans. He showed up at the planetarium a week later, alone this time, dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans. He looked different, less like a mafia boss, and more like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. Properly, without the chaos. Elena smiled. "You already thanked me." "Not enough." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You saw something no one else saw. You understood something no one else understood. And you didn't back down, even when everyone in that room was laughing at you. That takes a kind of courage I've rarely seen." Elena felt her cheeks flush. "I just love the stars. They've always been there for me. I guess I wanted to be there for them, too." Julian's expression softened. "You know, I've spent my whole life surrounded by darkness. The kind of darkness that isn't just the absence of light. It's the kind that seeps into your bones, that makes you forget what warmth feels like. But when I was sitting in that dome, listening to you talk about the stars, for the first time in a long time, the darkness felt safe. You made it feel safe." Elena's heart swelled. She didn't know what to say, so she just stood there, letting his words wash over her. "I'd like to see you again," Julian said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that surprised her. "Not because I owe you, not because I want to protect you, but because I think you're the most remarkable person I've ever met, and I'd like to know you better." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars beneath the surface, the grief he carried for his brother, the loneliness of a life lived in shadows. And she saw something else, too. Hope. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." They started slowly. Coffee dates turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks under the night sky. Julian was different from what she'd expected. Gentler, more thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He asked her about the stars, and she told him everything. She told him about her grandmother, about the first time she saw Saturn's rings, about the way the universe made her feel small and infinite all at once. He listened, really listened, and in return, he told her about his life, the burdens of the family business, the loss of his parents, the constant threat of betrayal. He didn't try to shield her from the darkness. He let her see it, trusting her to understand. One night, they were lying on a blanket in the planetarium dome, the projector casting a perfect replica of the Milky Way above them. Julian turned to her, his face half in shadow, half in starlight. You changed everything, he said quietly. You know that, right? Elena smiled. I just read the stars. No. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. You read the truth, and you weren't afraid to speak it. That's a rare thing, Elena. A precious thing. She squeezed his hand, her heart full. The stars don't lie, she said, and neither do I. He leaned closer, his lips brushing her forehead. Then tell me the truth now. Do you think you could ever love someone like me? Elena looked up at the dome, at the endless expanse of light and darkness. She thought about her grandmother, about the little girl who had cried at the beauty of Saturn's rings. She thought about all the years she'd spent feeling invisible, feeling like her body was a burden, feeling like her passions were childish. And she thought about this man beside her, this dangerous, wounded, tender man who had seen her, really seen her, and called her remarkable. I think, she said, her voice steady, that I already do. Julian's breath caught, and then he kissed her, soft and slow, under a sky full of stars that had witnessed 1,000 love stories and would witness 1,000 more. The planetarium became their place. Julian funded a renovation, upgrading the old projector and adding new exhibits. Elena continued to give her shows, her voice filling the dome with wonder and myth. And sometimes, late at night, when the last guests had gone home, they would sit together in the darkness, hand in hand, watching the stars wheel overhead. Elena never forgot the night everything changed, the night she had been mocked and humiliated, only to rise up and speak the truth. The night she had found a hidden message in the stars and saved a man she would come to love. The night she had proven, once and for all, that the universe didn't care about waistlines or bank accounts. It only cared about the truth, and the truth was this: she was brilliant, she was brave, she was worthy of love, and the stars, her oldest friends, had been there to guide her home. In the months that followed, Elena and Julian built a life together. It wasn't always easy. His world was still dangerous, and her heart still carried the scars of a lifetime of judgment. But they faced it together. Marcus, recovered and grateful, became a frequent visitor to the planetarium. He and Elena bonded over their shared love of puzzles and codes, and he often joked that she was the sister he'd never had. Leo, the quiet teenager, became Elena's protege. Julian paid for his education, and Leo blossomed under the mentorship, his brilliant mind finally given the space to grow. And the woman in the red dress, the one who had mocked Elena so cruelly, sent a handwritten apology. Elena read it once, then tucked it away. She didn't need apologies. She had everything she needed. One evening, as the sun set and the first stars began to appear, Elena stood on the roof of the planetarium, Julian beside her. The city sprawled below them, a glittering tapestry of lights. Above them, the sky was deepening into velvet. Do you ever think about how small we are? Elena asked, her voice soft. All the time, Julian said. But then I look at you, and I don't feel small. I feel like I'm part of something infinite. Elena leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. That's the thing about the universe, she said. It's vast and terrifying and beautiful. But so are we, every single one of us. We're made of stardust, Julian. The same stuff that burns in the hearts of galaxies. And that means we're never really alone. We're connected to everything. Julian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You're the first person who ever made me believe that, he said. The first person who made the darkness feel like home. Elena smiled, her eyes on the stars. Then let's stay here a while, she said. Just you and me and the universe. And they did. They stayed there, wrapped in each other and the night, as the stars wheeled overhead and the world below them slept. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.